Joe Biden says our economy had zero inflation for the month of July. Is he lying to us? Is he off his rocker? Did he forget his prune juice? It's hard to tell. Most independent fact checkers will just automatically stamp anything that comes out of this White House as the truth. So we got to dig into the actual CPI report to see what in the heck Biden is talking about, to see if he is lying to us. What's up, guys? I'm Nobody Special. And first, let's see what Biden just said.
Actually, I just want to say a number. Zero. Today, we received news that our economy had 0% inflation in the month of July. 0%.
Now, for those of us who reside on planet Earth and who actually go out into this economy and participate it on a daily basis, most of us would automatically, reflexively say that statement is total BS. But it actually is not an outright lie. While it is intellectually lazy, it's a cherry-picked statistic that they took the one number that actually makes them look good and they zeroed in on that and ignored all the other bad news. It's not an outright lie. With that, we're going to shrink my big melon of a head and take a look at these numbers. Now, this is the table that came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics just this morning in the CPI index, or the Consumer Price Index. And what you can see here is the number that Joe Biden is talking about. He is talking about the month-over-month reading in the Consumer Price Index for the month of July, and that was 0.0. Now, what that means is the average consumer price did not go up between June and July. For just that 1 month, there was no actual inflation. So that number right there is the one statistic that keeps me from saying this is an outright lie. This is the one thing that Biden has going for him. It is true that month over month, there was zero inflation. Now, the truth in Biden's statement stops right there, because most people, when they talk about CPI, what they're talking about is the headline CPI number, or the year-over-year number. That's the number that gets everybody's attention. And that came in over here at 8.5%. So the actual rate of inflation, when you hear inflation is this percent, they're almost always talking about the headline year-over-year number, and that was 8.5%. From July of 2021 to July of 2022, the average price went up 8.5%, and that is still a historically incredibly high rate of inflation. It's down slightly from last month's ridiculous 9.1% number, but our economy still has runaway inflation at 8.5%. This is not good news by any measure. The only silver lining to this cloud is the fact that it came down a little bit from its historic high last month. So for Biden to cherry pick this number and say 0% inflation, it's lazy at best. It's intellectually dishonest, a lie of omission at worst. But there's a few other things that make this a little worse. See up here in this headline, it says seasonally adjusted changes from the previous month. So that 0.0% number has seasonal adjustment into it, where people just say, well, that number seems a little high for the summer, so we're going to jimmy it down based on historical summer averages. Or maybe it was a little bit high for the spring or a little bit low for the spring, so we're going to raise last year's number. Anytime you get this adjustment, whether it be seasonal or otherwise, you always have the tendency for human biases to manipulate the data to make it seem better for the people reporting it. And you'll also notice that the headline number, the year-over-year 12-month number, is unadjusted. So that number does not have that human influence in it. So again, the headline 8.5% number is the more accurate reading. That's why people report it more often. Another reason why this statement from Biden that we had 0% inflation in July is dishonest is because of the rent. And I want to draw your attention down to the bottom of this report here, where the index for shelter came in at 0.5% for the month of July, or 5.7% year over year. Now, if you've been watching this channel for any amount of time, you've heard me rail on a statistic called owner's equivalent rent. And owner's equivalent rent is how the government lies to us about inflation. Now, if you're a renter, unless you are incredibly lucky, I guarantee your rent has gone up by way more than 5.7% in the last year. So why does the CPI report say 5.7% year over year inflation for the index? Well, that's something called owner's equivalent rent. And it's how the government manipulates the statistics downward. And I've talked on my channel an awful lot about how the government is financially incentivized to lie to us about inflation because it keeps their costs down even though the government gets a raise in tax revenue through inflation when people's wages go up and when people get more capital gains income. Now, just how bad of a lie is this index for shelter at 5.7% year over year? Check out this article published just 5 days ago from Fox 13. It says, here's how much the average 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom rent is in America. And I want to scroll down to these 2 paragraphs here that say the average cost of a 1-bedroom in August of 2022 is $1,769, a 39% increase from this time last year, according to Rent.com's monthly report. A 39% year-over-year increase. Meanwhile, the nationwide average for a monthly cost for a 2-bedroom rental in August of 2022 was $2,105, a 38% increase from a year ago. So the national average rent in the United States has gone up 38 or 39% year over year, yet if you go to the CPI report, it only says 5.7. And the index for shelter makes up almost a full third of the weighting of this entire index. So the single biggest variable in this large complex equation that is the CPI is understated by a factor of almost 8. And that's why if you go by the inflation on shadowstats.com, where they use a consistent methodology to calculate inflation based on the same way they used to do it back in the 1980s, it shows that the rate of inflation is actually closer to 18 or even 20% in the United States right now, a far cry from Joe Biden's 0%. And the last thing I want to add is the reason why the inflation numbers came down from their historic high last month has to do with energy prices. Energy has been the biggest driver of inflation so far this year. And we had big drops in all the energy categories last month. You can see here, energy on average was down 4.6% last month. Energy commodities down 7.6%. Gasoline 7.7% down. Fuel oil down 11%. Those are huge drops in energy prices. But the reason for those drops is not strength in the U.S. economy. The reason for those drops is the fact that the Biden administration is dumping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve's oil at a rate of about 1 million barrels a day on the open market. In other words, the president is artificially suppressing energy prices at the expense of future energy prices in order to make his inflation numbers look better in the short term for political benefits. And they can't do this for much longer. They've already used up about half of the oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. They have just enough to get them through the midterms, at which point they're going to stop dumping that oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and all of these negative energy numbers are going to come roaring back positive, and inflation is going to spike in this fall and this winter. So look, I can't tell you what the independent fact checkers in the media are going to say about this statement from Biden. They're probably going to line up and give it no Pinocchios and give him the gold medal for honesty, because that's the ridiculous state of the media in this country right now. But the fact is, for Biden to go on TV and say zero inflation, there was zero inflation denied, while technically true if you cherry pick the data, is lazy at best, outright lie at worst. No, we didn't have 0% inflation. We had 8.5% inflation. We are still in the midst of the worst inflation this country has seen in 40 years. And this rigging of energy markets, the dumping of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that they're doing to generate that 0.0 month over month number that he cherry picked, that can't last much longer. It's just enough to get him through the midterms, where he's hoping he doesn't get his butt kicked. And then after the midterms, this inflation is going to come roaring back when it gets cold in Europe and they start running low on gas and they stop dumping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve here in the States. And as always, my favorite way to protect myself from the eroding effects of inflation is through the ownership of physical precious metals. That's why I am proud to be participating in this year's Silver Symposium in Spokane, Washington on August 30th and 31st. This is the biggest precious metals conference in the country. It happens every year. It's going to be a fantastic time. All your favorite YouTubers are going to be there, and the biggest names in the precious metal space will all be in attendance. There's some great presentations, including one by yours truly, that are on the docket. So I hope to see you in Spokane on August 30th and 31st. The long story short, was Biden lying when he said there was zero inflation in July? No, I guess technically it wasn't an outright lie, but it was lazy, it was dishonest, it was a cherry-picked statistic. We are still in the worst inflation we've seen in 40 years. Till next time, live small and dream big.